Do you ever get the feeling in a game of Blood Bowl you're rolling too many ones? So in this example of dodge rolls, how unfair actually are the dice? So here we've got 16 ones, 5 twos, 5 threes, 6 fours, 7 fives, and 5 sixes. Is this very unlucky or is this completely broken dice? So this video is going to sort of have a little look at some of the statistics you can do just to work out how actually unfair this set of dice was. So we're going to be taking a look at the chi-squared test, which is able to determine if there's a statistically significant difference between expected frequencies and observed frequencies of the dice. Doing the chi-squared test of your dice rolls isn't as complicated as it sounds. You can just put the dice rolls into a Google spreadsheet. You can work out the total and the expected roll. So we'd expect to see 7.33 of each of the dice for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Here, though, we've got 16 ones, so that's what we're looking to test. Then what you need to do is work out the chi-squared value, and that is the sum of the observed minus the expected squared divided by the expected. So here I've done that by using the functions that you get in Google Sheets, which includes the power of 2. So basically we're doing A3 minus H3, B3 minus H3, and so on, and then finally dividing by H3, which is the 7.33. Then we need to look up one more number, which is the degrees of freedom. So that's the number of columns, which is 6 minus 1, times the number of rows, which is 2, which is 1. So 6 minus 1 times 2 minus 1 is 5. So our degrees of freedom is 5. So now we have to look at this value, which is the chi-squared value of 12.73, find our degrees of freedom in this chi-squared table, and then move across until we find where 12.73 is greater than, which is this value here. So 12.73 is greater than 11.07, but it's not greater than 12.833. So here then we've got probability of 0.05, which is only 1 in 20 that it would ever be this unfair looking. In answer to this question, there's actually a 95% certainty that these dice are unfair. But where do you go from here? Because this could actually happen by chance 1 in 20 times. The thing to do is to collect more data. So for example, if I say that this is that value times 2, and we just drag that all the way across, then we drag these formulae down, you can now see we get a chi-squared value of 25.45, and that is way off the board there. So now we're up into the 1 in 2000 probability range. Doing the chi-squared test for block dice is slightly different because you have a skull, a both down, but two sides represent a push, and then the defender stumbles and the pow. So here the expected is the total divided by 6, but the expected pushes is that value multiplied by 2. To work out the chi-squared value, we need to do A3 minus G3 to the power of 2 divided by G3. Then we add to that both downs, the defender stumbles, and the pows. But for the pushes, we do C3 minus H3 squared divided by H3. So for this chi-squared value, we've got 0.14. So then we need to look it up in the chi-squared table. Here we have 4 degrees of freedom, so we need to look it up on this row, and you can see that 0.4 is not greater than any of these values. That's because the ratios are very much what you would expect. With the second example, we've got 18 skulls, 10 both downs, 15 pushes, but only 7 defender stumbles and 8 pows. That's very different compared to the expected. Here we have a chi-squared value of 10.16, and when we look that up with 4 degrees of freedom, you can see that we are greater than the value of 9.49, but not greater than the value of 11.14. So that is a 5% probability, or 1 in 20 chance that those dice would look that unfair. You sometimes hear talk about conspiracy theories with the dice. So they'll say things like the dicings are more subtle. On my block dice, I get skulls paired with skulls and pows paired with pows, but my opponent gets pows paired with skulls to mask their good luck. So what do we say to something like this? Well, the solution to this is to record the rolls you get on the second die when you roll a skull on the first die, and also record the rolls you get on the second die when you roll a pow on the first die. Then you can run a chi-squared test on each of the above datasets over more than one game if necessary to increase the accuracy. I've also seen this conspiracy theory mentioned, which is when my ball carrier is sacked, the ball always scatters to the player that sacked me for a free pickup. So the solution to this one is to record the scatter rolls you get when you're sacked over several games. You can offset the D8 number rolled so that the 1 is the opponent, the 2 is the square to their left, and so on clockwise until you get back to the player's right hand side. You can then do a chi-square test on the results, but here you've got a D8, so you remember to use the degrees of freedom 7 instead of degrees of freedom 5, which is what you'd use for a D6. You sometimes see statements that the RNG is broken as you get sequences of dice that you would not see in real life. So what random number generator does Blood Bowl 3 use? Well, in the Steam community forums, the community manager from Cyanide posted that the RNG is using the Merzen Twister for Blood Bowl 3, which is the same one as used in Blood Bowl 2. And they've got a link here for a deeper dive for how that works. The Blood Bowl 2 forum post shows some answers from their developers of how the RNG works. So you can see that it uses the Python Merzen Twister, has a very long period, so it won't repeat sequences of numbers for up to 2 to the power of 19937, which is actually a number with 6001 digits in it. Merzen Twister has a K distribution for 32-bit accuracy from 1 to 623 dice rolls. That means up to 623 dice rolls, all sequences are equally probable. And in Blood Bowl, we're only throwing a 300 dice, that's quite important. Mentions that the Merzen Twister is not cryptographically secure. That's because after 624 rolls, you'll be able to work out what the future rolls will be. So you can basically get the randomness by calling random int method in Python. We know that the dice rolls for online games happen on the server, but does server initiate a new RNG for each match, or does it have one running sending out to every single person that asks for it? And their answer was to that the server sets up a new instance of the RNG for each match, and the AI doesn't cheat. So basically that's the summary. What about questions about whether the Python RNG has not been implemented correctly? It's really easy to try out the Python RNG for yourself. If you just go to www.w3schools.com, and if you click on the Python link, and you try it yourself with this print hello world sample, and then you get the code on the left and you get the output on the right. To get a random number in Python using the Merzen Twister, all you have to do is put in import random as your first line. Then you can call random.randint with the lower number of what you're trying to get the random numbers for, and the upper number that you want to get the random numbers for. Then I've just wrapped that in a print statement so that we get it on the output on the right hand side. So when we run this, you see we get the dice 1, 6, 1, 5. We run it a second time, you'll see that we get completely different dice. So you can see that it's pretty easy to implement the Python Merzen Twister. There's not a lot to get wrong, really. You do have the ability to specify your own seed. If you don't do it, on Linux and Windows, you'll get a random number from the operating system. But here I've specified a seed. So if I run this, the dice we get is 5, 2, 1, 5. If I run it again, you'll see this the same dice. So this is why the Merzen Twister is known as a pseudo-random number generator, because it's deterministic depending on the seed that you started with. It would be a bad idea to use a seed like this for Blood Bowl games, because every Blood Bowl game that started with the same minute, if you're using a timestamp like a string like this, would have the same dice. And you might be able to reverse engineer what the seed was and then work out what all the dice are going to be before they're rolled. It would be less of a problem with a more refined timestamp, including the seconds and the milliseconds, but again, it could still be reverse engineered potentially. You could concatenate a password to the end of this so that it can't be reverse engineered in this manner. Some people might comment that too many of their games have statistically significantly unfair dice. To look at this one, I did some Python code to simulate 100 Blood Bowl games. So we've got a little function to do the chi-squared test, a little function to process the dice, then processing a manager with 60 block dice, 20 dodge dice, 20 AV rolls, 10 injuries, 10 rushes. To keep it simple, we'll just have 6 outputs for the block dice. And the actual game code, we've got a for each loop to loop around 100 times, each with its own seed, and then we just print out the results. So you might have expected that only a few games would show statistically significant anomalies in terms of the dice being fair, but you can see here that game 1, Manager 2 gets an unusual amount of blocks that would only happen 1 in 10 times. In game 2, Manager 1 gets unusual dodges and unusual injury rolls. So this might be good for them, it might be bad for them, or it might just be that they've got a lot more fours and a lot less threes, and it didn't actually make a difference in the game. But it's still like weird looking unfair dice. Game 3 again, there's a dicing on the blocks because that's only a 1 in 40 unusual dice there. Manager 2 also had unusual dice. Then you can see in Game 4, Game 5, something odd happens there. Game 6, we have a normal game. But then Game 7, there's a sort of a unusual blocks for Manager 1. Very rare unusual dice with the dodges, and so on. So you can see that the actual unusual dice are quite clumpy. So you may go a few games with nothing abnormal happening, but then you might get several games in a row where you see unusual things. And I think if some people see multiple games in a row and they just happen to be in one of these clumps, they make the conclusion that there is something wrong with the dice and perhaps the RNG is broken. Okay, that's the end of this video. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon.